All right, Shalom, Shalom. Barakatah Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rakakwadash. Double honors to our apostles and elder bishops here at Great Millstone. Shalom to you brothers that's pushing the work in truth with all sincerity. This lesson is an update on Jacob's trouble, because for sure it's coming. All right, a lot of people don't like to deal with this topic, and by people I mean Israelites. A lot of you Israelites don't want to deal with this topic, but it's for sure the reality, for our future, because the scriptures go into, through much tribulation shall we enter into the kingdom of heaven. Okay, and the scriptures also speak on, all right, the hour of temptation. All right, and it's approaching fast. It's approaching fast, and there's so much evidence and so many things that's being done, and things are being lined up, you know, for this, before this becomes a reality. We told you that the so-called white man, Esau Edom, we told you he was the devil. Okay. And he is going to, all right, he's going to show you that. Okay. So Acts 14:22, confirming the souls of the disciples and exhorting them to continue in the faith. Okay. And that we must, through much tribulation, enter into the kingdom of God. Okay. And it's the same for us, being that we are pretty much picking up the mantle, all right, and finishing this ministry out. Okay. The apostles had to go through it because what? Even Yahweh Shai, he spoke on Jacob's trouble, all right, which in that time it was 70 AD. Okay. Have we forgotten? Luke 19. In fact, I'll just use the same one. So, and the Lord, it says he came down weeping from the mount. Let's see here. Yep. Luke 19 and 41, it says, and when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it, saying, if thou hadst known, even thou at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace. Okay, which he was that peace, them believing on him and believing on his name, believing in his resurrection brought salvation. Okay. And it brought them being sealed for salvation, I should say. Okay. But now they are hid from thine eyes, right? Because they rejected him. Just like now you got, Israelites who reject the truth. They reject the 100% doctrine. They reject calling on the name of the Lord. And that's only going to be a detriment to them. Anyway, it says, for the days shall come upon thee that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee and compass thee round and keep thee in on every side. All right. And what was he talking about? He was talking about 70 AD. All right. You had the Roman Jewish wars, and what sparked it was a rebellion. All right. The Israelites clashed, or a sect of the Israelites clashed with the Romans, and they ambushed the Romans, which led to a series of wars, and those wars ended the Israelite the Israelite state, for lack of better words. I don't like using that because it's being used now, but if you get what I'm saying, we lost the land. Okay, we were kicked out of that land, executed, and put into chains. Okay, and a lot of Israelites, escaped, but and they fled to the interiors of Africa. All right, they went throughout the four corners of the earth, but the majority of them, went into the interiors of Africa. Okay, So, and that day is coming again. That time of Jacob's trouble is coming again, because this is just another example of Jacob's trouble. Okay. And for our time, what it's going to be, it's going to consist of, you know, lockdowns. It's going to consist of, you know, the detainment, heavy surveillance, and, you know, you name it. Okay. Verse 44, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. Right? They didn't know then, and they damn sure don't know now. Because the way this thing is lining up perfectly. And these Edomites are moving, and they're moving fast. Now we already know the rhetoric that's coming out of as far as right. So like I was saying, Salaki too, everything's lining up, and the rhetoric of these Edomites is that what they want to take back over America. All right. All you gotta do is go to Twitter. If you want to see, the talking points of, them taking back this country, and them, basically they want to rid this country of you so-called Negroes. Okay. And that's apparent, and that's exactly what they're doing. All right. But we warned you at these times, and I'm gonna try not to be too long. I'm kind of already hitting that threshold, but I got a few videos I want to show, and I got a few things I want to read from chat, and then we got some precepts we already know. The Lord willing, this is edifying, So here we go. Play this one first.
Alabama Republicans straight up said they want the 14th Amendment overturned. They said it's in SCOTUS's hands. They're urging and hoping SCOTUS overturns the 14th Amendment. They said this live at a press conference today. This isn't a joke. You know what I mean? This is real life. And if you don't know what the 14th Amendment is, I know some of y'all aren't going to take the time to read it. It literally guarantees all people born within the United States or naturalized citizens full citizenship, as well as guaranteed equal protections under the law and due process. They are telling you they want to take away your citizenship, so you don't have equal protection under the law. So they can arrest you without any due process. They don't want that. And they are telling that to you to your face.
It's an opportunity to look at those congressional districts again. Gives us a chance in all of them if we get some reprieve from the courts. And so we'll see how that goes, and certainly hope that the Supreme Court will overturn Amendment 14 and gives us a shot to revisit those. We'll see how that goes, and certainly hope that the Supreme Court will overturn Amendment 14 and gives us a shot to revisit those.
What would you say from your perspective? I mean, other than Ms. Pro Tem, everyone was relatively silent on the goings-on. What would you say from your perspective is the biggest misconception about what the bills do, and a message that you'd like to see out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest misconception is, the thing about it is, people tend to forget what happened when this thing went to court before. We actually, the Republican Party had that seat in Mobile. It's number 2 seat, that's the congressional seat 2, so the district 2. And so that was one of the things, there's been a push through the courts to try to overtake some of these red state seats, and that's certainly what happened in that one. And with the ruling that happened in Louisiana, we felt like it gave us a chance to maybe regain that seat, but also opened up District 7. So I think that's happened. All we need now is the courts to overturn 14, and we can look at a new election. The thing is, if we did nothing was going to happen. And I applaud the governor for calling us back in and give us a chance to revisit that and look at it. And what happened here in Montgomery and that Senate seat probably should never happen to begin with. And so, of course, I'm at the point that probably none of it should happen to begin with. We got 3 branches of government. It's our job to legislate, to draw those district lines, and for the court to interfere with that. And to be honest with you, I thought it was a slap in our face, because we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in reapportionment drawing those maps, and they let an 18-year-old kid from the university, or I don't know how old he was, maybe 19, send the map in, and they took it without consideration for what we had done. And the way that the system is set up, that's the job of the legislative body, and I think we've done it in an appropriate way, and it's disappointing they didn't follow that rule.
All right, that's video 1. Okay, this was more of a sarcastic view of what took place, but I'm not gonna play that. I want to play this because it is just going to go into more detail, and they're calling this thing Jim Crow 2.0. Okay. But he calls it something even worse. All right. So
Over the last few days, I've heard that we're living in Jim Crow. So as a history creator, I thought it'd be irresponsible of me to not even try to back up those claims using history. So I did. And my response to that is not something that I think you would think it might be. I do not think that we're living in Jim Crow. I think we're living in something much worse. That's not voter suppression, that's voter dilution. This video is gonna be a little bit different than the ones that I normally do. I am just going off the dome. This is what I've researched. I have no cute, fancy, setup. This is just, it is what it is, but we gotta talk about it. But hold your horses, because we will get there, but we just have to start somewhere else, because redrawing districts and congressional maps is nothing new. It's a tactic that's been used for decades. And I'm gonna take you to 1980s Alabama. But first, we have to talk about what Jim Crow is and how we got here. The 14th and 15th Amendment was passed. It gave black men the right to vote, to be equal citizens. Now, this did not include black women, because we haven't got there yet where women had the right to vote. Fast forward to Reconstruction, and now you have black men earning office and being representatives and changing the landscape of the country in real time. Some were appointed, some were voted in, but nonetheless, the country was diversifying in a way that the majority did not like. Just because slavery was over doesn't mean that racism left with it. So this is when Jim Crow was established. You had literacy tests, poll taxes, economic retaliation, physical retaliation, intimidation, anything you can think of. They just wanted to make sure that black men could not show up to the polls and vote, because voter suppression was the tactic. Because black people were going to go to those polls, they were going to vote, and they had the numbers to actually assign representation that aligned with their interests. That was a problem. Representation was a direct problem to total control. Disenfranchisement was the greatest tool used for people who did not want to see the South or the country change at all. This ushered in the Civil Rights era, which eventually led to the 1965 Voting Rights Act being passed. This banned discriminatory voting practices, strengthened the 15th Amendment, and also added federal protections. One of those protections was pre-clearance. This is important because it required jurisdictions with histories of discrimination to have to get federal approval to change voting practices. This was a landmark law, and this is also why people thought that Jim Crow died when this was passed. But it didn't die. It evolved. Now, people cannot just outright deny black voters or minority voters the ability to vote. So they had to change their tactics, and they did. Voter suppression became voter dilution, and it works its way up through the decades. Now, voter dilution was always present. It just wasn't the main goal. Now, it had to become the main goal. And it worked quietly in places like Mobile, Alabama, starting in 1911, all the way up into 1980 when it got called out publicly by black voters. The case of the city of Mobile versus Bolden actually caused Congress to act a couple years later. Here's why. Since 1911, the city of Mobile had a 3-person city commission system. These members were elected at large, which meant every single person in the city would vote for these commissioners. On paper, that sounds fair, until you get into how the city of Mobile was districted. It never stopped black residents being able to vote. What it did do was dilute their voting power so that they never really got to choose who was representing their district. The majority did, and that's on purpose. Not the majority of their district, the entire city, a city that was already racially polarizing. And it constantly left these black voters with people who weren't interested in their interests and would not work towards them either. The Supreme Court ruled against them because they said that there was no constitutional violation for discriminatory effect. They could not prove that. And these black voters had no federal protections to help them against systems and structures that they knew were working against them. Mobile had perfected the art of voter dilution. The city could always say that we gave black residents the right to vote. We didn't stop them from coming to the polls, and their voices mattered equally. Their system was designed to look neutral, and you could argue that. What it did, though, was water down the black vote because they knew that they did not have the majority across the city. Congress understood that danger in 1982. They amended Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. This allowed voters to challenge election systems that propped up discriminatory results as opposed to discriminatory action, because intent could not be proven, results could. Mobile versus Bolden was vital to this decision. This case did something important. It exposed a system that was operating in plain sight. It also exposed the evolution of Jim Crow. Jim Crow went from they cannot vote to I can allow them to vote, but I refuse to let their vote have power. We see the evidence of this through 2 terms, one called cracking, one called packing. Cracking is when a district is split in order to reduce its power across the board. An example of packing is putting all the black voters into one district so that you reduce their power elsewhere. Now, does that sound familiar when it comes to these new maps and these new districts that are being drawn in real time across the country? The Voting Rights Act of 2026 does not have the same power that it used to have. That's because the Supreme Court has messed with key provisions like the ones found in Section 4. And this has happened over time. This one in particular did away with pre-clearance. Do you remember how important pre-clearance was? So I'll go back to the original question. Are we living in Jim Crow? And my answer remains unchanged. No, we are not living in Jim Crow. We're living in something much worse. And you can see that happening in Tennessee. You can see it happening in Virginia. You can see it happening through the last 2 decades. And you could see it happening most likely in the rest of the states to come. So my question to you and me is, why would they do this and what are we going to do about it? And voter dilution is much more dangerous than voter suppression.
There's nothing we can do about it. All right. And that's going to be, the reality that Jake going to have to deal with, because Jim Crow, like he said, is worse than that. So essentially it mutated, and it's going to get way worse. What does this mean for you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans? All right, we're going to get into that. I'll finish this off, though.
Not only does it strip you of your voting power, but it wastes your time. And I say this as objectively as I can. History has the opportunity to repeat itself. but it also has the opportunity to be changed right now. The point is that if we say this is like Jim Crow, but the old version, then technically we are wrong. This kind is wearing a completely different set of clothing. It's cerebral, it's technical, it's strategic, it's a different kind of warfare.
Yeah, and you're going to see that all together. And they're going to use their technology, all right, to kind of, reel everyone in under this control. So let's see here. Where do we go from here, Slakia? So let's dig a little bit more right here. Okay. So I asked chat, if the 14th Amendment is abolished potentially, what could that mean for blacks in an environment that can possibly become more harsh due to scarcity and recession? I kind of get straight to the point now. I kind of like, I don't like to beat around the bush. We understand, like, we know the scarcity and all of this. This is coming. Hard times is coming. It's no question about that. So I kind of just get straight to the point with chat. If the 14th Amendment, which guarantees birthright citizenship, equal protection under the law, and due process were hypothetically abolished, it would represent one of the most dramatic constitutional changes in U.S. history. This is speculative, all right, but for Black Americans, given history patterns, it could create severe legal, political, and social vulnerabilities, especially during economic hardship, scarcity, and recession. Core protections at stake. The 14th Amendment underpins equal protection, right? Citizenship rights, due process, right? And that's dealing with the court system. So you get arrested, you go through the process. Okay, you get a lawyer and all of that stuff. But now they want to strip that away from you because they just want to throw your ass in a detainment camp forever. How long? However long they want to keep you there. So it says many civil rights rulings, school desegregation and anti-discrimination protections, voting access expansions, potential real-world consequences, weakened civil rights enforcement. Without equal protection, states could potentially enact more discriminatory laws. Challenges to racial segregation or unequal treatment would become harder. Housing, employment, policing, and education disparities would worsen. And if you thought they were bad now, it's going to be really bad because they're going to cut, when they cut this funding and all of that stuff, people ain't going to have no money to kind of live, right? And people become homeless, and they've already made laws against, being homeless. So where does that leave you? Right? Internment camps. Okay. So, and then it's diabolical because they got this whole control grid set up where they're going to be surveilling and using AI to surveil and do all of this other stuff, which is just, it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. All right. And we're going to need the Spirit of the Lord and very soon. Okay. This is close. All right. So citizenship uncertainty, birthright citizenship protection, could be challenged, creating legal instability, expanded statelessness risks. All right. So that means what? The state can do you harm. Okay. They can do you harm, which they have done plenty of times before. And we know our history is nothing but that here in America. Okay. That's why we, with urgency, have been, told to forsake this place. All right. I just turned the notifications off. I don't know why it's coming up. But anyway, greater political targeting of marginalized communities. Voting suppressing. We don't care too much about voting. You ain't supposed to be voting anyway. And you ain't supposed to be putting a leader that's not of your nation above you to represent you. We already know that. Okay. And being that we live in a hyper, let's see, what's the name? Predatory capitalist system. Right. It's not, they don't care for the betterment of the poor. This is all about exploitation, this whole society. Okay. So, and then you're going to have a lot of, Negroes talking about vote, come down to the polls. And if you ain't doing this, they're going to make other jakes who don't want to vote enemies, because they want to fight. They want to fight to keep their rights to vote and be represented in Congress. And, but the scriptures say what? We don't have no continuing city. Okay. Let's get that really quick. Hebrews 13:14, for here have we no continuing city, but we seek one to come. Right. Our thoughts or our mind is supposed to be on the world that's coming, because this world ain't got nothing for us. We don't have an inheritance. We don't have no claim to any land. And they made sure of that. The so-called white man made sure that you wouldn't have no claim to nothing. You couldn't even buy a house. There was a purpose for redlining, for economic sabotaging, because they were waiting for this time, this day. Because the only inheritance that you have in this world, all right, is an ICE warehouse, a detention center. Okay, to be straightforward and blunt. So I don't want to read the rest of this. I do want to cut to the next question I asked chat. Okay, well, I'll read this. Historical patterns. Post-Reconstruction and Jim Crow eras demonstrate how weakened federal protections often result in segregation, voter suppression, economic disenfranchisement, racial violence. And that's going to ensue again. That's going to come again. They're going to have it to where you're not going to be able to go to certain stores or certain restaurants and certain places of shopping. Okay. They're going to cut that. And they're going to box Jake in again. As Luke 19 said, they're going to set a trench about thee. All right. Here, I want to word it right. Luke 19:43, for the days shall come upon thee that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee and compass thee round and keep thee in on every side. Okay. And that happened during the time of the apostles. All right. The Roman Jewish wars. And they cut Jake off, the Israelites off, from being able to have, resources. Okay. They starved them out. All right. It was a war. It was literally a war. And what you think is coming now? In Rome 2.0. Okay. All of this is coming again. Right. And that's why we say Jacob's trouble, the hour of temptation, because that hour of temptation, that's going to be vastly, and it pretty much is what we're going to get into. This is going to be different. This is going to be, a whole different ugly monster. All right. So broader societal risks and harsher economic conditions, competition for jobs, resources can inflame nationalism or racial division. And that's what it's going to do. Governments may expand surveillance or coercive policies. Right. And so they're going to make you the enemy, because now what are they doing? They're politically, they're again sabotaging you again, to where you're not going to have any access to resources or access to certain, aid. Right. And the flip side is what? People are going to be basically, you're going to be on the outside looking in, fighting for food, or fighting for resources. And guess what? They're gonna label you an extreme, an extremeness or whatever. Okay, we'll get it more get more into that in a little bit. It says, important reality, abolishing the 14th Amendment would require an extraordinary constitutional process, which, as you can see with that video, Nathaniel Ted Ledbetter, okay, they're just nonchalantly, dealing with that issue. Like they have confidence that, they're going to get the 14th Amendment overturned, right? It says it remains highly unlikely, but you see, chat is delusional. Chat don't know what's going on. That's why I only use you for certain talking points. So, but discussing the scenario highlights how foundational civil rights protections are. So, for Black Americans, bottom line for Black Americans, removal of the 14th Amendment could mean increased legal precarity. All right. Greater exposure to discriminatory systems, heightened vulnerability during recession or scarcity. Heightened vulnerability during recession or scarcity. So if you think it's going to be hard, it's going to be harder for Jake than it is for anybody else. Okay? The exact outcome would depend on political leadership, state laws, public resistance, and broader democratic institutions. But history suggests marginalized communities would likely bear disproportionate burdens. So the burden, is going to be harder for you, Jakes. Salaki says, I asked chat, now how would this look if ICE were involved? If immigration enforcement agencies like ICE were operating in a scenario where constitutional protections were significantly weakened, the impact could expand beyond undocumented immigration and potentially create broader civil liberties concerns, right? Especially during periods of economic instability or political extremism. Hypothetical risks could include expanded surveillance and policing. What do you think they're building the data centers for? I leave that up to you to figure out. Expanded surveillance and policing. In a harsher political climate, increased identity checks, greater data sharing between agencies, more aggressive detention practices, potential, right, they're going to be putting the firing squads, putting people to death. Potential profiling based on race, and they're already doing that, so ethnicity or socioeconomic status. See? So if you're in the hood, it's going to be bad. Broader targeting of vulnerable communities. Historically, when governments expand enforcement powers, marginalized groups often face disproportionate scrutiny. And they're gonna make it a crime to be poor, to be black, so-called black. Okay. And it's funny how, they make policies that put you in a certain condition and then they punish you for being in that condition. See how that works? It says communities may avoid public services, healthcare, or legal systems. Yep. Erosion of due process. If due process protections were weakened, faster detentions, reduced legal recourse, expanded administrative powers, higher risk of wrongful detention. And not to mention that the wrongful conviction dealing with so-called Negroes, blacks, is higher than 80%. So the people that get arrested the most, right, 80%, okay, are incarcerated wrongfully already. Okay. Labor and economic exploitation, fear of detention can suppress wages, discourage labor organizing, increase worker vulnerability, intensify underground economies. Yep. Social division, economic scarcity combined with aggressive enforcement could increase scapegoating, deepen racial and class divisions. Yep, man. Oh boy, it's gonna get bad for Jake. It's gonna get really bad. Okay, normalize militarized responses to social problems. Okay, good Lord in heaven. All right. So again, the scripture in Revelations 13:11. You know, he had two horns like a lamb, but he spoke as a dragon. And when you go, and essentially when you go back into that, you know, that word, the Greek word for dragon is dracon, and dracon is a derivative of draconian, right? Which is harsher punishments. Okay. And it says here, draconian, of or pertaining to Draco, in reference to laws rigorous, extremely severe, or harsh. All right. Draco is the Latinized form of Greek dracon. See? A little bit more. It says, let's see. A name of the archon in Athens who laid down a code of laws for Athens that mandated death as punishment for minor crimes. His name seems to mean literally sharp-sighted. See? And they're gonna be really sharp-sighted with you know the control grid, the data centers, all right, and surveillance, AI cameras, drones. Okay, it's gonna get really ugly, really fast. Okay, and these are all hypotheticals, but being that things are lining up to look, or things are lining up to you know fit this hypothetical situation or scenario. Look at that. Historical context, past examples such as Fugitive Slave Acts, Jim Crow enforcement, Japanese American internment, Red Scar surveillance show how weakened rights combined with state enforcement powers can disproportionately harm targeted populations. ICE's legal authority is currently focused on immigration law, but in an authoritarian or crisis scenarios, institutions can be politically expanded or repurposed. And what you think they're going to be repurposed? What, to start going after Jake? Bottom line, in this speculative environment, ICE, and it's only speculative because we got evidence to back it up. All right, and of course, foreshadowing, we can see this definitely happening. ICE involvement could symbolize intensified state enforcement, heightened fear in vulnerable populations, expand, and that's what they want. They want fear, and that fear is coming. You know, it's gonna get, it's gonna get really bad, and there's gonna be a heightened sense of fear, right, among Jake, and really that's the Lord's doing. Okay, because if you look at Jake now, you Israelites, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, you all over the freaking place. You know, the woman is running loose, wild, and thinks she can do whatever the hell that she want, oppressing the man right along with the system. Okay, these men out here lost their minds. I don't want to be gangbangers and drug dealers. All right, and boy, that's over with. All right, so greater civil rights erosions. Expanded racial profiling risk, and they got AI, you know, now at their behest to, you know, efficiently oppress. ICE warehouse tracker, see where mega detention centers are planned, and they're all over the United States. Community opposition and court challenges are hampering ICE's effort to turn 24 commercial warehouses into detention facilities in a matter of months. All right. but in a place in in an environment where there's an emergency, national emergency, man, they can be repurposed and they can get those warehouses despite, the pushback from communities. Okay. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is speeding ahead with a controversial effort to drastically expand its detention space by buying up warehouses nationwide. So you don't think them gutting the 1965's, Bill of Rights, or and cutting the fourth, if I said that right, in the 14th Amendment, you don't think that has anything to do with this? You don't find that suspicious? Right? It says that converting them into holding centers. According to internal documents, the agency plans to buy and retrofit 24 commercial warehouses, boosting its detention capacity to more than 92,000 beds in a matter of months. Whew. The largest of the proposed facilities, which ICE has described as megacenters, would hold 7,000 to 10,000 people at a time and will serve as the primary location for deportations. ICE also plans to buy 16 warehouses to convert it into processing centers, which would hold 1,500 detainees for an average of 5 to 7 days documentation or documents show. Okay. And guess what? You Negroes, you ain't got no place where they can deport you. Where they gonna deport you? All right. So that only leaves, one or two scenarios. Either, they're gonna be getting rid of people in large groups, which that's gonna happen. A lot of the YNs and that nigga, those who perpetrating nigga culture, you're gonna be unalive. You're gonna be taken out. Okay. So 2 Ezra 16 and 68. This only sets the stage for this. All of that I just read sets the stage for this. Okay. 2 Ezra 16 and 68. For behold, the burning wrath of a great multitude is kindled over you, and they shall take away certain of you and feed you and feed you being idle. Right? That's you being locked up. Okay. Because idol doesn't move. With things offered unto idols. All right. Putting you in facilities, giving you shots, or even giving you, that chips, because in the very near future, they're going to change how buying and selling. They're going to change buying and selling altogether. Okay. Everything is going to go digital. All right. In the center of this new economic system is going to be an RFID chip. Okay. So, and they that consent unto them shall be had in derision and in reproach and trodden underfoot. Right. And just like, for example, you had, the Cubans, they were Donald Trump, and they had all those songs. You had Latins who voted for Donald Trump and all that stuff. And guess what happened to them? They still got arrested and detained and deported. So it's going to be the same for when they implement this, fully implement this beast system, where now in order to move anywhere in the United States, you're going to have the appropriate documentation, which is mainly going to be a digital ID and a RFID chip to buy. and to sell whatever, you know. So verse 70, it says, for there shall be in every place and in the next cities a great insurrection upon those that fear the Lord. Why? Because they're going to be going door to door, taking niggas out of their houses. Because of what? Because they got rid of that birthright citizenship. Okay. So you are no longer a citizen, but you are, you know, labeled something worse than the immigrant. Okay. Because where's your place of you know, where are they going to deport niggas? We can't be deported nowhere else in the world because what? According to them, we don't have no home. We ain't got no homeland. We ain't got a native land. Our native land is what, you know, displace America. I mean, we know what our true native land is, right? Verse 71, it says, they shall be like madmen, sparing none, but still spoiling and destroying those that fear the Lord. Okay, because they're going to be having orders. They're going to be having orders to do these things. And they're going to execute those orders. It says, well, they shall waste and take away their goods and cast them out of their houses. That's right. Then shall they be known who are my chosen, and they shall be tried as the gold in the fire, because what we're actually going to need help, spiritual power. Okay. And how else are you going to be able to get past the surveillance, the AI surveillance and all? It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. And they're making it impossible. So how are we going to fare in this whole ordeal? That we're going to need some divine help. Isaiah 59:19. So shall they fear the name of the Lord Yahweh. All right, from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun, when the enemy shall come in like a flood, and they're getting ready to do so. That's without no doubt. They are coming. Right? It says the spirit of the Lord Yahweh shall lift up a standard against him. Okay. So when they come in as a flood, the spirit of the Lord is going to raise up a standard. And that standard here, the Hebrew word is nawas. And it says here to flee, escape, to flee, to escape, to take flight, and depart, disappear. And I've had visions on the very days that we're coming into. Soldiers, militarized police on the streets, gunning people down. It's going to be chaos. Okay. And in that vision, I literally had divine help. I had an angel take me up from being shot down. I was running away from a soldier who had an assault rifle, and he was about to let me have it, but the Lord or the angel had taken my hand and took me, and we took flight. That was a vision. All right. To fly, to the attack, or on horseback, to drive at, to take flight. Okay. To put to flight. And in some instances, the Lord's going to give us power to put our enemies to flight in these times, to drive hastily, to cause to disappear, hide. Yeah, we're coming into something very, very different. All right. Jeremiah 30:7, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. Okay. So yeah, all of this is, this is definitely everything that they're doing is definitely evidence to that point out that, man, Jacob's trouble is near. All right. We can for sure say this is a highly possible, and it is. And I'm 1,000% sure that this is definitely going to happen. All right. Them, stripping the Fourth Amendment, them using ICE to detain black folk. Black folk. All right. The Lord giving us spiritual power to combat, because, yeah, this is pretty much This is political tyranny. This is tyranny. All right. All right. It says, verse 8, Jeremiah 30:8, for it shall come to pass in that day, said the Lord Yahweh of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck and will burst thy bonds, right? And strangers shall no more serve themselves of him. So the Lord, we're going to be able to spiritually break loose from this man. Okay. We're going to break loose from his hold. Yeah, it's going to get bad. Second Ezra 16:73. Then shall they be known who are my chosen, right? And they shall be tried as the gold in the fire. That's right. Having no place of rest, having to disappear, having to be out of sight, because of the control grid that is going to be, they're going to be using this thing, and they're going to run it efficiently, and it's going to do all the heavy lifting for them. AI is going to respond, or AI is going to send warnings and signals to the first responders, drones, and oh boy, you see military boots on the ground, them rounding people up, them gunning people down. Hear, O ye my beloved, said the Lord, behold, the days of trouble are at hand, but I will deliver you from the same. Okay. And we're being told that, being warned in time of trouble, but we're being told that he's going to save us from that. All right. Be ye not afraid, neither doubt, for God is your guide. All right. So you see what it say. Okay. We ain't supposed to have no fear in that time. Okay. We're supposed to understand what's coming, and we're supposed to understand that the Lord said, well, he's going to save us. It says, in the guide of them who keep my commandments and precepts, said the Lord Yahweh, let not your sins weigh you down, and let not your iniquities lift up themselves. Okay. So I'm pretty much cut it there. This was longer than I intended, but Lord willing, it was edifying. Until next time, I say shalom.